Welcome once again. This is Business Matters, your platform for everything business as well as the economy. My name is Stephen Ipalibo Lawson. Businesses need to get their structure right so that they can take advantage of different opportunities that the economy has to offer. If we do that, obviously we can become as successful as our vision encapsulates. Let's have our business update. As is our culture on Business Matters, we invite a distinguished guest to the studio to do justice to a topic that we have enlisted for this particular edition. And we're actually looking at understanding regulatory compliance for Nigerian startups and small businesses. And my guest, ladies and gentlemen, is no other person than a brilliant and leading startup lawyer. She is an international speaker, a TEDx speaker as a matter of fact, a legal content creator, and an author of several books. She's the founder of Barinada Legal, Nigeria's foremost startup-focused corporate and commercial law firm, as well as the founder of the Business Legal Structure Program. As the case is, she's also the founder of the Law and Business Community, an online community with well over 4,000 entrepreneurs, something that we definitely will obviously greatly encourage. As a matter of fact, in 2019, she became a viral sensation across Africa when she was recognized by Dr. Strive Masiyiwa, a billionaire giant in the telecom sector, as the case might be, for our contribution towards helping startups have access to legal service through our organization. In his word, he says, we need Barinadas in every single Africa country. In 2019, she was invited as a speaker at the first convergence of the Afro-Asian FinTech Festival that was organized by the Central Bank of Kenya. She was, as a matter of fact, the only female panelist at that particular event. Also in 2019, she was the This Day newspaper legal personality of the week, a lady who is quite passionate about startups, a married lady, a mother, and one who creates memories that can actually depict great success at the end of the day. It's great to have you in the studio.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, great. Listen, we're looking at understanding regulatory compliance for Nigerian startups and small businesses. It's an area you are very passionate about. Given the fact that Dr. Strive actually recognized your contribution, that must have been a wonderful feeling. Can you share what the memory was like for you?
Okay, it was a very interesting one. I was in church that day, and my phone was just buzzing. Usually I'll put my phone on silence, but I was receiving a lot of buzz on my phone. It was almost close to close of church activities, and then my husband just came and he was like, babe, you don't blow. And I was like, how? Like, what happened? Then I checked my phone, and I saw tons and tons of notifications. Fantastic. And I just knew that someone somewhere had mentioned my name. Fantastic. And so immediately I went to the source of the notification, and I saw that Strive Masiyiwa had, picked a comment I made on his post. I made an actual post about that.
Yes, I follow him as well.
Okay.
It's a great man.
So, I mean, that singular mention has been, even till tomorrow, I still get people who say, I followed you because of Strive Masiyiwa, and he brought in lots of patronage. He literally made me the sensation for the moment. And in retrospect, one time I stumbled on that particular post where he did that mention, and it has like the highest level of engagement, fantastic. One of the highest level engagement posts, yes, on his platform.
Now, it's important because we need to be able to create an environment where startups and small businesses need to thrive. Yeah. And one of the things that you actually have been looking at or working over the years has to do with regulatory compliance. it's very key for any business that is operating in Nigeria to understand what some of the requirements they need to know before they get into those businesses. But before we go into that, I just wanted to ask you, how do you feel about the Nigerian Startup Act? You think that we've done well with it? We think that it has its own merits or demerits? Is this something that is commendable? What should that impact businesses for today and the future?
The Nigerian Startup Act, I would generally say it's a commendable effort. The fact that they tried to, provide a kind of regulation, for the startup space, it's quite commendable because, the startup space is largely unregulated. I am not talking about the specific industry regulations that each of them have to comply with, but there is no umbrella body whereby you have to go register or so. So, that was the idea behind the Startup Act. However, implementation has been something else. So, but on the face of it, the act itself is supposed to be good, and it's actually commendable. But implementation has been a major challenge.
I guess with time will tell how far the impact is going to be, whether positive or negative, as the case may be.
Exactly. And we look forward to when there will actually be actual compliance, and then we will now know if, this was really worth it at the end of the day or not.
All right, let's look at the regulatory compliance issue for Nigerian startups. What exactly is it about? Do we say that as an umbrella affair, or is this industry specific, as the case might be? If any business is starting up, what are the steps such businesses need to be able to take in order for them to be in the right side of the law?
Thank you. So for anyone who wants to do business in Nigeria, it's just like how you're born into a family. No one exists by himself.
True.
Right? There is a source. You have a source, and that's how it is even for business owners, especially startups. You belong to either one industry or the other. So basically, I like to think about compliance in two ways. There is a general compliance, and then there is an industry-specific compliance. And the general compliance basically has to do with, those regulations that affect the operation and formation of any business, regardless of the industry. For example, let's take the Corporate Affairs Commission.
Sure.
And CAMA, Companies and Allied Matters Act. That's one regulation that cuts across different industries. In fact, that's like the primary regulation, because the law says if you want to do business in Nigeria, you have to register that business in Nigeria. Now, beyond what the CAC provides as regulation, right, for formation and operation of businesses, there may be other industry-specific, regulations, and this is solely based on the nature of your business. So, if anybody wants to start a process, right, or begin any business in Nigeria, first thing you want to ask yourself is there any law that affects this kind of business I'm about to go into? And then what are the things that I need to do to comply with these laws?
Now, the legal implications of not being in compliance, especially if you're in a high-end market and you're looking at the risk factor, as a matter of fact, is something that nobody wants to think about. But would you say that some of the startups that actually fail perhaps might be because they never understood how important regulation was or is to them, so to speak? And could it have been that they were not compliant enough to have been able to see what the market held in order to secure their own successful, thrive through the market?
The issue of failure of startups has, I think regulatory compliance is like one out of several other reasons why a startup may fail.
Okay.
And I don't believe, aside from the fact that there are regulatory policies that may ultimately yank off a particular business model, turn it over, like
True.
A business model that was once a very valid legal business, could suddenly by one single regulation turn invalid or illegal. And so when you go into that line of business, or if you're already in that line of business and you wake up, and I'm going to use the example of the Go-Karter business and other ride-hailing
yes, that's
companies.
True. Very particular in Lagos State here.
Yes, one time, and for me personally, I just feel like the attack was not just on the ride-hailing, business model,
okay,
right? Or it was not just about having motorcycles, because we still have motorcycles in
True, as dispatch
exactly.
Service providers.
Apart from dispatch service providers, we still have actual motorcycles, Okadas, right, in some parts of Lagos.
That's true.
I mean, I know about Solo, and
some part of
Festac.
Okay,
yeah.
Yes, it's important. Even the Badagry houses because of the road
exactly.
network. So you know.
But now there was one regulation that says, oh, accidents are on the rise because of this Okada or because of bikes. So no more bikes in Lagos. That was the regulation. So that particular regulation actually put a lot of ride-hailing companies out of business. Now, the ones that were smart were able to quickly pivot into something else, and that's why you have the dispatch. They went into logistics and went into food delivery services. So regulatory compliance is one thing that a lot of businesses have to be aware of. Now, to your question as to whether regulatory compliance was one of the reasons why they failed or was a major reason why they failed, it's not a major reason why they failed. There are so many reasons responsible for startup failure.
Okay. Now, when you look at Nigerian businesses today, a lot of people oftentimes complain the fact that a lot of some of the policies with regard to regulations have actually not enabled their businesses thrive. And as a lawyer, I mean, you're a legal practitioner. What do you think some businesses should be able to do in order to see if they can address some of those kinds of bottlenecks? Because businesses today operate at the speed of thought with what Bill Gates would say, and then you have a situation whereby it looks like regulation is actually lagging behind innovation. Are there legal processes that startups or small businesses can actually embark on in order for them to be able to hold on to a regulation so that they can sustain? And then that way, businesses actually, one of the ways that they contribute to governance has to do with an aspect of tax payment. So when a business is successful, you get to pay the tax, and the tax is a major source of revenue for the government for them to be able to execute all of those infrastructural projects. What legal options can startups take if a regulation or a policy doesn't seem to align well with their operations?
The truth is, regardless of what industry that you play in, there is one regulation or the other you need to comply with. And I will use very practical. I mean, if a startup feels like this particular regulation does not align with our purpose,
and then you see there is real business service, or there is a service ongoing that's going to be beneficial for the economy. I mean,
I think that I will probably need a more practical example of what you need, because the law is the law. If you want to go into skincare brand, for example, right, or you're building a food brand, you know that, and you're going to be doing processing and everything, you know that you have to comply with NAFDAC regulation. So it is not even a matter of, the process for, going about getting NAFDAC certification is so rigorous, is this, is that. You need to find a way to comply. Non-compliance would mean that you can't go all out. It means that you'll probably continue to play small because you know that you haven't, complied with what you're supposed to comply with. So that's on one side of it, and that's even for the food brand. For other players in the startup space, like maybe fintechs, there's always there's always a barest minimum compliance that you can do, right? Okay. Outside of the general compliance, CAC, FIRS, there's always a barest minimum, and this is a function of what you're even trying to build in the first place. So if you're doing like a peer-to-peer lending platform, depending on where you are, your basic lending license agreement could help you do that, right? If you are going to do like a savings, build a savings app or something, your multipurpose cooperative license could help you do that.
Fantastic.
Those are like basics until you now move, but you don't stop there, right? Especially because startups are like fast-paced companies. They are looking to grow and disrupt the marketplace. They are moving away from traditional ways of doing things to, using technology to disrupt. So basically, you need to keep working towards getting whatever license you need to get. And then another way is to leverage other people's technology or infrastructure.
Fantastic.
If you haven't had the finances and the resources to get a particular license. I like to use the fintech examples a lot because there are lots of fintech companies that actually have gotten the license to operate a payment solutions, right? Sure. And then there are new ones who are just coming up but may not have. You could enter into a partnership with those who have, right, and then use the infrastructure.
Now, I'm going to pause you. This conversation has to continue. I'm going to go on a short break. As soon as I'm back from this commercial break, the conversation with the fintech continues because of recent. I had the privilege of attending the Nigerian Fintech Week, and it was an amazing experience. The opportunities are huge. A lot of the things that were talked about had to also do with regulations, and we're going to explore that conversation further with Baranada after the break. You're welcome back. This is Business Matters. If you've just joined us, we are looking at understanding regulatory compliance for startups as well as Nigerian businesses. I'm in the studio with Madam Barinada, and I've been looking at the fintech as a specific industry when it comes to with regards to regulatory compliance, as a matter of fact. And I know in the fintech space, there are several corporate governance, will I say, documentation or processes. And let me read out some here. For the existing regulations in the corporate governance space in the fintech includes guidelines on mobile money services in Nigeria. That is by the Central Bank of Nigeria. They have the guidelines for fintech regulatory sandbox, which is by the Securities and Exchange Commission. They also have the guidelines for data protection compliance in Nigeria by the National Information Technology Development Agency, NITDA. And then you have the framework for the provision of value-added services by the Nigerian Communications Commission, NCC. And then you have for the Value-Added Tax Act for FIRS. And then we have the NIMS Industry Standards and Operating Guidelines by the Nigerian Interbank Settlement System. Now, all of these guidelines, just in one industry. How does a startup cope with all of that? Doesn't that create some kind of encumbrance for their own operations? And you must also imagine the financial implications to obviously adhere to some of these guidelines. What's your take on that?
Building a fintech is not for the faint-hearted.
Oh my God! I was hoping we were not going to go there. You know, we know it's a huge investment area because it has to do with a lot of trust.
Yeah, that's why I talked about leveraging other people's
technology and
infrastructure when you are just starting.
Okay.
I know there's something they do with. Sharing APIs,
yes.
That now makes it possible for you to be able to render the same services, but leveraging, I know for a fact, I wouldn't want to mention names, I know one of the new generation banks that has a license, because I've reviewed some of the documentation for some of our clients who, were going into these areas, but had to leverage on the technology of this sort of financial institution. So it
means that if a smaller startup or a startup is coming on board.
Oh, but not all of the regulations though, because I know you mentioned guidelines for VAT, and
yes,
also
VAT,
that one is
okay,
as an existing company you have to comply with that yourself. Okay. NITDR. Data protection, you have to comply with that yourself. But to the more specific ones that have to do with
the operations process needs that. For example, NIMS, obviously NIMS is the primary settlement system in the financial space that you ensure, because you and I use our mobile phones for all kinds of transactions. Yes. So you want to be sure that the trust deficit when it comes to the issue of startups or new businesses operating is actually fully addressed. And I imagine that is why a startup that is compliant with all of those regulations and guidelines,
yes,
within that industry space also creates confidence in the market, because
compliance helps your people to be able to deal with you.
Because we know that of recent, unfortunately, I know one of the fintech actually had to close a unit of its business that had to do with agent banking. And one of the reasons they actually brought forward had to do with the Naira devaluation, the foreign currency issue, so perhaps they couldn't hold up to the importations of the POS machines with which they can use to, express most of their businesses into the informal sector. Nevertheless, we also have those that have failed. And so people began to ask the question, was it that they were not compliant with the regulations? What were the regulators doing when they saw that this fintech, for example, which is an industry-specific issue we're dealing with, what were the regulators looking at when so much money of other people's have actually seemed to go down the drain? So, well, the last understanding I had is that the particular fintech is now finding a way to refund, whatever the principles that case might be. I have no idea about it. But that also goes to show you the fact that when an organization aligns with the regulation in this industry, it obviously helps to avert some of these failures.
Yes, absolutely.
Now let's look at small businesses themselves understand that there is a need for access to professional services. Professional services as company registration, professional services like legal professional services that has to do with taking off the burden from your back and ensuring that the professional handles that. How does that work, especially within this space, if a company or a startup needs to be up and about, and the access to legal consultation? How does that play in trying to help them do what is right?
Okay, so one of the things I always say to businesses, especially startup, is, in fact, let me just focus on startup because I love to talk to startups. I feel like every business have needs anyway that needs to be catered for, but I feel like the legal needs of a startup, especially as relates to issues of ownership, right, of the company's stock, their legal needs are quite different and quite urgent than the needs of a regular traditional business. Someone who is just running a regular traditional business.
So what's a startup then? Perhaps you might want to define what that startup is.
At this point, right?
Because what is the distinguishing element between that and the regular business that you were talking about?
Yes, so I've had people say, but a startup is actually a startup.
Yes.
What it is, you're just starting. So while that is one element of a startup, because you're actually just starting, right? But not, companies like PayStack are still referred to as startups.
Yes, that's
Seller,
true.
they're still startups, but they are not. It is not just because they are just starting. That's not what makes them a startup. What makes a business a startup is because they are technology driven. That's a very key aspect of it. In fact, even the Startup Act defines the recipients of the act, like those that it concerns, to be technology-driven startups, right? So you have to be technology-driven. You have to have the mindset of disruption. You're out to disrupt even a saturated market. So basically, startups are businesses that are disruptive in nature and technology-driven. And for everyone who is running a business, you actually need to have legal support. You actually need to have your own go-to lawyer, right? So that when these issues arise, because there are going to be lots of issues that you will face in business, you have someone who gives you, the legal advice you need when you need it. You can't, it's like preparing for war. You don't prepare for war on the day of the war.
Not at all.
Exactly. So you need to actually be always ready by making sure that you have access to a legal expert, someone who actually understands business, right? There are lawyers for different purposes, but if you own a business or you run a business, you actually want to work with a lawyer who deals with business owners.
All right. Thank you so very much, Barinada, Alex, Ianacho. This has been an amazing engagement, and I wish we could extend more of the time, but you can be rest assured that we will extend another invitation in the future, and I hope we are going to honor us like you've honored us today.
Thank you. I sure will.
So it's been a pleasure. Viewers, this is so much we can take for the interview sections. Please stay tuned. Business Matters continues after this short break. thank you for being with us on this particular edition of Business Matters. Just like you've seen it, you need a legal representation to make sure your business is done right. Follow us on all our different social media handles, and if you want a particular topic for us to cover, please reach out to my producer and director. My name remains Stephen Ipadubo Lawson. Bye-bye for now.
Great minds meet, great ideas inspire and transform a great nation.